I got home on a Friday, way before I was supposed to. I remember the doorknob felt stiff under my hand, like the lock didn't want to turn. Then I realized the door was already open, not wide but enough that it didn't catch the frame. I stepped inside, didn't hear the TV or music or any of her usual routines. Instead, I heard this rough sound from the bedroom. A laugh, sort of strangled, like someone was forcing it out of her. I thought maybe she was choking on something. It was that raw. So I walked down the hall, slow, trying not to imagine what I'd find. But deep down I knew. You can feel it in your gut before you see it. I stood in the doorway. I saw him first. He was on his feet, bare. My underwear on his hips, blue cotton boxers I'd just bought last month. She was lying on the bed, her hair messed up, her neck caught under his hand. She was smiling at him, or maybe at me, I couldn't tell. It was like I was invisible, or some random delivery guy who walked in by mistake. I just stood there. I must have been in shock, but I didn't feel anything in that moment. No burning anger, no heartbreak. I was just numb. She looked at me, glanced away, and turned back to him. As if I'd come by to drop off a package and she didn't even have to sign for it. He didn't stop either. He kept his grip on her throat, not squeezing all the way, but enough that she was gasping between laughs. It was disturbing to see her like that, but I couldn't move. I just stared. My bag was still in my hand, the strap cutting into my palm. I wanted to let go, but my body froze. There was a silence, like the house itself was holding its breath, waiting for me to do something, shout, throw a punch, anything. But I didn't. After a second, I backed out of the bedroom, walked to the dining area, pulled out one of those old wooden chairs that squeaks when you drag it. I carried it over and set it against the wall in the hallway. I sat down, put the bag at my feet, and I waited. I could hear them, but I tried not to process every sound. My mind slipped somewhere else. I thought about how I'd picked up a six-pack of her favorite soda on the way home. How I'd planned to surprise her, maybe catch a movie. Stupid, everyday stuff. But there I was instead, sitting in my own house, listening to them finish. It felt like time stretched out. Could have been minutes, could have been longer. I don't really know. The sounds got quieter. Then he said something in a low voice, she giggled again, and they shifted around. I guess they realized I wasn't going to barge in or start shouting. Eventually, the door clicked open, and he stepped out. Didn't even look at me. Just walked past, still wearing those boxers, heading to the bathroom. I saw a tattoo on his shoulder, some eagle or hawk. He was built, not a kid. Probably mid-30s, a little younger than me but not by much. Then she came out, wrapped in the bedsheet. She didn't meet my eyes. Not once. She disappeared into the kitchen. I heard water running, the faucet squeaking. Then silence again. Maybe a minute later he came back, wearing his jeans and t-shirt now. He nodded at me like we were strangers on a bus, like a quick, hey, without the word. And then he walked out the front door. I heard his footsteps on the porch, then on the gravel outside. I just sat there. She walked back into the hall, arms folded under her chest, the sheet dragging behind. Her face was blank. No fear, no guilt. Like I'd just seen something that happens every day. She lingered for a second, but I didn't say a word. I didn't even stand up. Eventually, she turned around and went back into the bedroom. I waited in the hallway, staring at the wall. The paint was chipped in one corner, and I remember fixating on that. Tiny cracks in the plaster, hairline fractures creeping outward. I'd painted that wall myself a few years ago. Did a pretty good job, I thought. Then I heard her open a dresser drawer, maybe looking for clothes. The bed creaked. She must have sat down. The entire house was so quiet I could hear my own heartbeat. I let a few more minutes pass, though it felt like hours. Then I stood up, dragged the chair back to the dining table, and set it where it belonged. I went to the bedroom door. She was there on the edge of the bed, pulling on a pair of jeans. She looked up at me and then back at the floor. I stepped inside. stopped right in front of her. My voice felt caught in my throat, like it took a huge effort to speak. But I only said one sentence. "Now I see you both." That was it. She opened her mouth like she wanted to argue or explain. But no words came out. I just turned around, walked away, and closed the bedroom door behind me. I didn't slam it. I closed it gently, as if any extra noise would break the last thread holding my world together. I felt hollow, but there was this strange clarity in my head. I knew exactly what I'd do next, step by step. Maybe that was my mind's way of coping, giving me some structure in a moment that had none. I went down the hall, dropped my bag in the living room, grabbed my keys. My heart was pounding now, every beat drumming in my chest. My throat was dry. But I was calm on the outside, like ice. I walked out the front door, got into my truck, and drove to the garage out back where I keep all my tools. The overhead light buzzed. I opened a drawer, took out the crowbar, felt its weight in my hand. Solid steel, chipped paint at the tip. I swung it through the air once, testing the heft. My mind flashed with images of that man in my underwear, her face twisted in that weird laugh. I shut the drawer. When I stepped outside, I saw her car parked near the side of the house. I recognized the license plate, the bumper sticker she'd put on there a few months ago. Suddenly, that made me want to tear it all apart. I didn't reason about it. I just walked over and slammed the crowbar into the windshield. It cracked, spiderwebs shooting across the glass. I heard my own grunt, like something primal escaping my chest. I hit it again, and it shattered inward, shards falling onto the front seat. Headlights were next. Then the hood, the doors, the side mirrors. Metal dented under the blows, glass rained. I lost count of how many times I swung. The crowbar felt hot in my grip, my muscles aching, but I didn't stop until the car was totaled. Then I drove downtown. There's a bar a few blocks away, the kind of place where people park their bikes out front, show off their chrome. I'd seen his bike there before, a sleek thing with custom exhaust, easy to recognize. He was probably inside, or maybe he'd gone somewhere else. Didn't matter. I spotted the bike in the lot, walked over, crouched down, unscrewed the gas cap, used a piece of hose I found in the bed of my truck to siphon the fuel into a container. Took me a couple of minutes. Then I stood there, looking at the polished metal. My reflection stared back, a stranger with a crowbar in his hand. I poured the gas all over that bike. The smell was sharp, made my eyes water. I fished a lighter out of my pocket, paused for a second. The night air was still, a dog barking somewhere. Then I flicked the flame. Dropped it. The bike whooshed up. Fire crawled along the metal, scorching it black. I could feel the heat on my face. I didn't wait to see who came running. I just got back in my truck and drove home. My grip on the steering wheel was shaky. My mind was spinning with images, him in my boxers, her face, that laughter. I pulled up to the house and sat in the driveway for a moment. My breathing was ragged, like I'd run a marathon. Then I went inside. She was gone, maybe out looking at her destroyed car, or maybe she'd gone somewhere else entirely. The house felt empty. I walked to the bedroom, stared at our wedding photo on the nightstand. We looked so young, eyes bright. I wanted to punch the glass, but I didn't. I took it, set it on the bed. Went to the closet, pulled down a bunch of boxes filled with memories, letters, cards we gave each other, a baby blanket, her old diaries, everything that made our life together feel real. I gathered them up, dragged them outside to the fire pit. It was an old metal barrel I'd used before for burning trash. I piled everything in. The wedding dress was in a storage bag, sealed against dust. I ripped it open, yanked the dress out, stuffed it in with the rest. Then I lit a match, dropped it, and watched the flame catch. For a moment I thought I'd feel relief, or at least a sense of finality. But I just felt more empty. The smoke rose, carrying bits of charred paper, fabric turning black and curling in the heat. I watched until it was all ash. My eyes stung from the smoke, or maybe from something else. I don't really know. When the flames died, I turned around, walked into the house, and shut myself in the spare room. I leaned against the wall in the dark, slid down until I was sitting on the floor. That was the first time the anger hit me full force. My hands were trembling, and I could feel my chest tighten. But I didn't shout or cry. I just let the anger surge in silence, fists pressed against my eyes. At some point, I must have fallen asleep on the floor. I remember my neck was sore in the morning, stiff. I got up, left the house, and found her in the living room. She was wearing an old sweater, hugging herself, like she'd just come in from a storm. She looked at me. I said, "I'm leaving for a while. If the phone rings, don't pick up. And don't call the cops." She just nodded, eyes down. I told her I'd be back eventually to grab some stuff, but I didn't want any scenes. She stayed quiet. Before I walked out, I heard our daughter's voice in my head, imagining how I'd explain this. But I had no words. So I said nothing. I left and drove to the gas station, got myself a coffee, stood there by the counter. The guy behind the register said something, asked if I was okay. I just shook my head. Paid and walked out. I had no idea what came next, but I knew there was no going back to the way things were. That morning, I felt like I'd severed the last thread of trust I'd ever have in anyone. But I'd only seen the beginning of it. The real nightmare was still down the road. I went back home later that afternoon, told my daughter her mom was gone for a bit. She asked why. I said, she needed some space. My voice sounded cold, even to me. I saw the confusion in her eyes, but I couldn't stand there and explain. Not then. She was 16, still in high school. I told her to focus on her homework, that everything would be fine. She asked if Mom was sick or something. I said, not exactly. Then I went to my room and shut the door. She didn't knock. She must have sensed something was off. But for now, silence was easier for both of us. That was how the worst day of my life ended. With me alone, drifting around the house, stepping around broken memories, hearing echoes of laughter I never wanted to hear again. And knowing damn well I'd never look at her the same way again. Or look at myself the same either. I didn't know how bad it would get. I didn't know that soon enough, I'd do things that would carve themselves into my mind forever. But for that moment, I just stood by the window, sipped cold coffee, and stared at the spot where her car used to be, thinking about how quiet the world can get right before everything falls apart for good. That night I was still running on fumes. Half of me felt like I'd blacked out when I wrecked her car and torched his bike. The other half was thinking about what comes next. Do I lawyer up? Do I confront them again? But I didn't do any of that. Instead, I sat in the living room for a while, listening to the clock tick. My daughter was in her room. She didn't ask questions, maybe sensed the tension. The house was a mess, figuratively. Everything felt upside down. Eventually, I found myself in the garage again, checking the damage I'd done to my own conscience. A crowbar on the workbench, still with flecks of paint and glass clinging to it. I couldn't bear to look at it, so I stuck it in a locker where I'd keep it out of sight. The anger was still there, swirling under my ribs, but I'd already spent the physical part of it. What I did next was impulsive, but it felt like the only outlet left. I grabbed an old bat from the corner and walked around the side of the house where her car sat, battered to hell. The shape of it reminded me of a crushed soda can. I swung the bat just once at the side door, a final release of rage, then I dropped it on the ground. My breath came in gasps. I was shaking, but not just from the adrenaline. It was something deeper. Like I'd stepped into a new world I didn't recognize, and this violence was the only thing that made sense there. I walked back in, locked the door behind me. I considered calling the police, but then I thought, about what? Report my own vandalism? Or accuse her of adultery? That wasn't going to help. None of it made sense. So I sat on the couch, left the lights off, and stared at the dark. My phone buzzed once or twice. Probably her. I ignored it. Hours later, I heard my daughter rummaging in the kitchen, maybe making breakfast. I realized I'd been up all night. My back ached, my eyes burned. But I forced myself to get up, put on a clean shirt, and walk out there. She looked at me like she was examining a stranger. I said, "Your mom had to go see a friend. I'm not sure when she'll be back. Let's just not make a big deal of it, okay?" She swallowed, nodded, and went back to buttering her toast. I noticed she was wearing pajama pants with cartoon characters on them, some leftover from a couple years ago. She was outgrowing them. The sight felt like a punch to the gut. My little girl was nearly an adult, and here I was unraveling in front of her. We ate quietly. I told her I'd drop her off at school. She said okay, no fuss. I drove her in silence, each of us locked in our own thoughts. When she got out, she paused, turned back like she wanted to say something, then changed her mind and closed the door. I watched her walk into the building and thought, I have no idea how to explain any of this to you. On my way back, I stopped by a diner. Had a coffee black. The waitress, a woman in her 60s with bright red lipstick, asked if I was all right. I guess I looked terrible. I said, "Just a rough day." She gave me a refill without charging. I nodded thanks. It was a small gesture, but in that moment, it felt like the last bit of kindness in the world. I drove home, half expecting to see her car gone. But it was still there, wrecked in the driveway. A reminder of what I'd done. I pulled in behind it, got out, and walked inside. The house smelled stale, like the aftermath of an argument that never got aired out. I opened a window, let some fresh air in. Then I stood in the living room, looked at the pictures on the walls, photos of our family vacations, random snapshots. She was in all of them. And suddenly I couldn't stand it. I took them down, every single one, stacked them in a box. My hands were trembling by the end. Some frames fell and cracked the glass. I didn't bother picking up the shards carefully. I just wanted them out of sight. Once they were gone, the walls looked naked, like the house was just a shell. In a way, that was what I needed. She came home eventually, if you can call it that. She walked in, gave me a quick glance, then avoided my eyes. Her hair was messy, her face puffy from who knows what, crying maybe. I said, "You're here." She nodded but didn't speak. I asked her, "You told him not to come around?" She just nodded again. That was it. Our marriage, reduced to silent gestures in a half-empty living room. I went to bed that night in the guest room. She stayed in the master bedroom. I lay on top of the covers, fully dressed, staring at the ceiling. My mind replayed everything I'd seen, especially the look she gave me, like I was nobody. It kept pounding in my head, and I realized I'd have to either confront her or let this silent tension kill us both. But part of me was scared of what I'd do if I started talking. The next morning, I woke up early, before dawn. I got dressed in work clothes, didn't bother showering. Drove to my job at the warehouse. Usually, I'd chat with the guys, grab coffee, settle in. That day, I went straight to my station, started loading crates without a word. They must have seen something in my face because nobody asked me a damn thing. By lunch, I was done with the day. Told my boss I needed to leave early. He didn't ask questions, just nodded and let me go. I guess I carried that kind of mood that warns people to stay out of your way. I got home before noon, which is when I did something I never thought I'd do. I walked up to the front door but didn't go inside. I hesitated, hand on the knob, thinking, maybe I don't have a home anymore. Maybe there's nothing here for me. The thought felt like a blow to the chest. But I opened it anyway. The house was empty, she was gone again. Her car was also gone from the driveway, towed probably, or maybe she'd driven it if it still ran. I stood there in the silence, feeling the walls close in. That's when I decided to take all her clothes from the bedroom closet. Not just toss them out onto the lawn, like some cliché move. Instead, I piled them in the trunk of my car, neat. Then I drove to a local thrift store donation box. Stuffed it all in there, piece by piece, every shirt, every dress she loved. If someone else needed them, good for them. That was my way of making sure I never had to see her in those clothes again. It was petty, sure, but it felt final. Then I went home, grabbed a black trash bag, and tossed in every single letter, card, or note she'd written me that I hadn't burned yet. Old photos, too, ones I'd missed in my first purge. Except for the ones with our daughter. I kept those, tucked them aside. But everything else went in the bag. Then I hauled it to the backyard barrel, struck a match, and watched them burn. The smell of smoke choked me. I coughed, tears streaming from the fumes. But I stood there till it was ashes. That was my way of burying the life we had. Maybe it was overkill, but it was the only thing that kept me from going insane at that point. I spent the night in the same guest room, doors shut, lights off, listening for any sign she'd come back. But she didn't. I was alone, the house around me feeling more like an abandoned building than a home. My mind wandered to thoughts of telling my daughter the truth, but the words stuck in my throat. I kept thinking, she's just a kid. I can't break her like this. Turns out, I would break her in a way I never expected. But that was still a year down the line. For now, I told myself I was in control. That I'd burned the memories, taken my revenge. I thought I'd won something. But looking back, I realized I was only starting to lose everything that mattered. And I had no clue how much deeper the betrayal went. I guess you can call that the setup. A man finds out his wife has another lover, wrecks their possessions in a rage, tries to erase her from his life. It felt like I'd done something meaningful, punishing them both. But in the grand scheme, it was just a surface wound. The real damage would hit me later, and it was going to cut deeper than any crowbar or flame ever could. So that's how I spent those first days, lost in anger, numb in shock, trying to destroy anything that reminded me of her. And all the while, I kept pretending to my daughter that her mother was away. Not a single word about the truth. Maybe I hoped I'd wake up one morning, and this whole thing would turn out to be a nightmare. But life doesn't work like that. And once a fracture appears, it only spreads. About a year later, we were living in this strange arrangement, me and my daughter in the house, and her mother somewhere else. We hadn't filed for divorce, hadn't made it official, but it was as good as done. I was living like a roommate to my own kid, hardly talking, just cooking meals and paying bills, then locking myself in the guest room each night. Her mother would come by sometimes, usually when I was at work. She'd stay in the master bedroom for a few hours, pack some things, then leave. We avoided each other's schedules. People in town must have whispered, but no one confronted me about it. My daughter never pressed for an explanation, though I know she had questions. She was finishing high school now, busy with friends, part-time job, all that typical teenage stuff. But there was a tension whenever we ended up in the same room. She'd glance at me, then look away, like she was afraid she'd see the truth in my face. Then one day, she brought up a school project about genetics. Something about analyzing DNA markers, building a family tree, all that. She needed samples from her parents. I remember her standing in the hallway, notebook in hand, asking me if I'd spit in this little test tube for her. She said it so casually, like it was nothing. "Dad, it's for my biology class," she explained. "We're doing a paternity and ancestry thing." I hesitated, but it seemed harmless. So I did it. I mean, why wouldn't I? I was her father. A couple weeks passed. I didn't think much about it. One evening, she came home from school holding a sheet of paper. Her face was pale, and she looked like she'd seen a ghost. I was in the kitchen, slicing up some leftovers to heat. She walked over, put the paper on the table. I could see data, charts, numbers. I didn't understand it right away. She said, "Dad, something's not matching. My marker and your marker, they're not the same." For a moment I didn't get it. Then I realized what she meant. Her teacher must have explained that if two people are direct father and child, certain markers align. Hers didn't match mine. The test was telling us, that I wasn't her biological father. I remember the room swaying, like I'd been punched. My vision tunneled. She was still talking, trying to figure out if the kit was faulty, or if maybe she'd labeled something wrong. But I knew the truth right then. It explained so much, going back 20 years. The early birth, The hush-hush explanations, the weird looks from some folks who always did the math on our wedding date and her birthday. It all lined up. I'd been raising someone else's kid. She saw the look on my face, and she froze. It must have been pure shock, or maybe devastation. I just stood there, mouth open, trying to form words. She asked, "Dad?" I forced myself to say, "We'll figure it out. Maybe it's a mistake." But I knew it wasn't. And as soon as the words left my mouth, she burst into tears. I tried to hold her, but she pulled back, confused and upset. She asked, "Is there something you're not telling me? Did you know?" I said, "No, I didn't know." And that was the honest truth. I had no idea. But I could see her mind racing, connecting dots that would tear her life apart. I told her to go lie down, try to calm down. We'd speak to her teacher, do another test if we had to. She went to her room, tears streaking her cheeks. I stood there alone in the kitchen, my heartbeat thudding like a war drum in my ears. I remembered the day she was born. The doctor said she was premature by about a month, but she was healthy enough. I believed it. Why wouldn't I? My wife had told me the same story, and I'd never questioned it. I'd loved that little girl from the moment she came into the world. I taught her to ride a bike, cheered her on at soccer games, stayed up all night when she had fevers, read stories to her when she was small. I was her dad in every sense. Except for biology. That night I tried to call my wife in name only. She didn't pick up. I called 3 times, left no messages. Then I texted, "We need to talk." She must have known what was coming, because she didn't respond. I sat on the couch in the living room, the same couch where I'd once read bedtime stories to my daughter. And now, everything felt tainted by this lie. When I finally did see my wife, ex-wife, whatever you want to call her, it was at the door the next morning. She'd heard from our daughter, I guess, or maybe she just sensed the storm. She came rushing in, still wearing the same clothes from last time I'd seen her. She went straight to our daughter's room, closed the door, and they talked in muffled tones. I didn't interfere. I just stood there in the hallway, fists clenched, waiting for them to finish. It felt like I was an intruder in my own home. When she came out, her eyes were red. She looked at me and opened her mouth to speak, but I raised my hand. I said, "I don't want your explanations. I just want to know one thing: who is her biological father?" She tried to stammer out an answer, maybe something about it being a fling right before we got married, or that it was complicated. I didn't let her finish. I said, "You lied to me for 20 years. Why should I believe anything you say now?" She started crying, but it didn't move me. I was beyond anger, beyond tears. I felt hollow inside, like a canyon. I told her, "Go talk to a lawyer if you want. But from now on, this house isn't your home. You come here to see her, that's fine. But don't you ever try to speak to me again unless it's about our daughter's well-being. And no more lies." She tried to say something else, but I turned my back on her and walked away. I heard the front door open and close. I stood in the kitchen, gripping the edge of the counter, trying not to punch the wall. Later, my daughter came out of her room. She was quiet, eyes puffy. She whispered, "Mom says she's sorry, that she thought it wouldn't matter because you raised me as your own." I swallowed the lump in my throat, forced myself to speak gently. "It doesn't change how I feel about you. You're still my daughter in every way that matters." But even as I said it, I felt a crack in my voice. Because I was hurting in a way that she couldn't understand. My whole life felt like a lie. The woman I thought I knew had betrayed me twice over, once with the affair I caught her in, and again by hiding this paternity secret for 2 decades. My daughter came closer, like she wanted a hug. I held her, and for a moment, we both cried. I felt her shaking, but I also felt the distance between us, the new knowledge that someone else was her biological father. It stung in a way I can't put into words. All I could think was, if she's not mine, then what was this life I'd built? From that day on, things changed. I still provided for her, took care of what she needed. But I was like a ghost in my own house. The last illusions I clung to had been shattered. When I thought of my wife, all I pictured was her face that day in bed with another man, the laughter, the disregard. And now I realized she had a talent for lies that spanned our entire marriage. My daughter tried to talk to me sometimes, tried to tell me that her mother was also hurting, that none of this was meant to be malicious. But I couldn't hear it. I only saw betrayal everywhere I looked. At night I'd lie awake, replaying the last 20 years, wondering if any of it was real. Was every kiss a lie? Every anniversary a joke? Every milestone with our daughter just a cover for the truth? I started going out more, spending evenings driving around, visiting random bars, sitting by myself at a booth or on a stool, nursing a beer. I didn't care. I just didn't want to be home, facing the silence. The guys at work noticed I was different, but they kept their distance. I guess I radiated something that told them to stay away. My daughter finished her school year. She asked if we could go visit colleges in another state. I said I'd drive her if she wanted, but she ended up going with her friends. I couldn't muster the energy to pretend everything was normal. Inside, I was unraveling. I'd spent a year trying to move past the affair, and now this second blow had knocked me flat. When the time came for the final decision, I supported her financially. I wrote checks for tuition, but I didn't take her on campus tours or help set up her dorm. I just wrote the checks and kept my distance. Part of me hates that I did that, but I felt so lost I couldn't be her anchor. Not then. She told me she understood, but I could see the hurt in her eyes. That was the second heartbreak, discovering that my precious little girl wasn't mine by blood, that I'd been living a fiction created by a woman who'd never been honest with me. It carved me up inside, deeper than the affair ever could. And it turned me into someone I barely recognized, a man who wanted to disappear rather than face the family he'd once cherished. I didn't vanish right away. For a few months, I tried to keep going. I'd wake up, go to work, come home, nod at my daughter if she was in the kitchen, then lock myself in the guest room. I avoided my wife like the plague. She'd sometimes come by to see our daughter, slip in and out, and we'd exchange maybe a sentence or two, purely logistical. She needs new shoes. Or, she has a doctor's appointment next week. It was mechanical, cold. Inside, I felt a storm. I'd lost the sense of what was real and what was fake. Every memory with them was tainted, and I couldn't handle that weight. The day came when my daughter left for college. She hugged me goodbye, told me she loved me. I said I loved her too, which was true in its own way, but it was choked by the betrayal I couldn't shake. Then she drove off. She didn't look back. The house got even quieter. I found myself losing hours staring at the walls, replaying old conversations in my head, questioning every part of my marriage. That's when I decided to disappear. No big scene, no dramatic farewell. I just started packing. I quit my job, cashed out what little retirement I had, found a cheap place a few towns over. An attic room above an auto shop. I didn't tell my wife where I was going. I left a note for my daughter that said, "I'll be in touch soon." But I didn't say where or why. Then I got in my truck and drove away. At first, it felt liberating. A new town, new faces. Nobody knew me or my baggage. I found work at a local mechanic's garage, mostly grunt work. That was fine by me. I kept my head down, did my shifts, climbed up the back stairs to my little room, sat on a cot, stared at the ceiling. Drank cheap beer on weekends. It was quiet. Numb. That was all I could handle. I changed my phone number, didn't answer emails, didn't keep in touch with old friends. I told myself I was finally free, free from the lies, free from the betrayal. But the truth is, I was running. And every day, I'd think about my daughter, wondering if she was okay. One time, I nearly called her. But I stopped. I thought, what do I say? Do I tell her how broken I feel, how I can't look at myself in the mirror anymore? That wasn't fair to put on her. So I stayed silent. After a few weeks, I sent my wife, ex-wife, in my mind if not on paper, a box with everything that remained of our shared memories. I'd hauled it with me initially without realizing. Diplomas, baby photos, letters from when we were dating, the hospital bracelet from our daughter's birth. And on top of it all, the DNA test result. No note, no explanation. I just shipped it. The clerk at the post office asked if I needed insurance. I said no. Then I told a mutual acquaintance. Let her know the daughter is aware of everything now. Because she needed to know how deep the wound went. It was brutal, maybe sadistic in a way. But in my twisted logic, it felt honest. She'd built 20 years of lies. I wanted her to live with the truth. I pictured her opening that box, sifting through the old memories, then seeing that DNA paper last. I imagined her reaction, maybe tears, maybe rage. But I didn't care. I just wanted the last word, the final knife twist. And that was it. I cut off any remaining ties. Time passed. A year or two. I fell into a routine: work, drink, sleep. I talked to people in the shop, but never about personal stuff. They only knew I was a guy from out of town, divorced, trying to start over. I didn't go out much, didn't try to meet anyone new. I wanted to be invisible. Some nights, I'd stare at the flickering neon sign outside my window and wonder where my daughter was, if she hated me, if she missed me. But I'd smother those thoughts with another beer, another cigarette, and try to forget. It wasn't until about 4 years later that I finally picked up the phone when she called. I recognized her voice right away, even though it had changed. She sounded older, more careful with her words, like someone who'd learned not to trust too easily. She said, "Dad?" I said, "Yeah." There was a pause, and I expected tears or yelling, but she just said, "How are you?" I said, "I'm alive." Another pause. Then she told me she was doing okay, working on her degree. She asked if we could meet sometime. I told her maybe. Then we fell into a strange silence. Neither of us sure how to talk about the gulf between us. Over the next year, she called me now and then. Short conversations, updates on her life. She never asked me to come back. She never asked about her mother. It was like we had a fragile arrangement. Pretend everything was normal, talk about the weather, her classes, my job. But the undercurrent of pain was always there. I could hear it in her voice, like a tremor she couldn't hide. It mirrored what I felt, that sense of having lost something we couldn't ever get back. Eventually, 5 years had passed since the day I left. One Friday night, I was sitting alone in that cramped room above the shop. Drinking cheap whiskey, flipping through channels on a tiny TV. My phone buzzed. It was her again. She said, "Dad, can I come visit?" I paused. In my head I heard that laughter from so long ago, the lies, the betrayal. But then I heard her voice, hopeful, maybe needing closure. So I said, "Sure." She showed up the next day, looking so grown up I barely recognized her. I saw the faint resemblance to her mother, though it felt like a knife to notice that. We hugged awkwardly. She looked around the place, at the grease-stained walls, the old cot, my meager belongings. She said, "You've been here this whole time?" I nodded. She sat down on a stool, asked if I was okay. I said, "I'm all right." She fiddled with her keys, then said, "You know, I never cared if you were my biological father or not. You're the one who raised me." I swallowed hard and nodded, but I couldn't meet her eyes. She said, "I love you, Dad." I said, "I know you do." We talked a bit. She told me she was in a serious relationship, thinking about moving closer to the city for work. She hinted that she wanted me in her life again, but she didn't push. I appreciated that. When she finally left, she gave me another hug. I watched her drive off. Then I went back inside, sat on my cot, and stared at the ceiling for a long time. I knew I'd never fully fix what was broken. But I also knew she was trying, and maybe I owed it to her to try too. A few weeks later she called again. This time, she sounded different, cautious, like she was afraid I'd hang up. We talked for an hour, about nothing special, just life. When we hung up, I realized I felt a little lighter. But I also felt guilt. Guilt for disappearing, for hurting her with the truth, for not being the dad she deserved. And that's something I carry every day. I'm not a hero. I'm not a victim either. I'm just a man who found out his life was a stage play, with scripts and costumes I didn't even know I was wearing. And when the curtains fell, I couldn't handle it. So I tore everything apart, took my revenge, and ran. You can call it cowardice, or self-preservation. Maybe both. All I know is that 5 years later, I'm still here, alone, trying to figure out what to do with the rest of my time. Some days I manage to function. Some days I can't. But I pick up when my daughter calls, because she's the only thing left that connects me to a life that once felt real. Her voice is different now, more guarded, but still holding on to hope. Sometimes I blame myself for that guarded tone. Sometimes I blame her mother. Sometimes I blame the man I found in my house. Sometimes I blame the doctors who told me she was premature. But at the end of the day, blame doesn't fix anything. It just sits there in the dark. And so this is where I am, a dusty room above an auto shop in a small town, working on cars all day, drinking alone on Fridays, passing the weeks as if I'm waiting for something. I don't know what. Maybe forgiveness, maybe an ending that wraps it all up. But life doesn't tie things up neatly. It just goes on. And we go on with it, carrying our regrets and our scars. It's been 5 years since I left. Feels like a lifetime. I keep to myself, show up at the shop, fix engines, change oil, handle transmissions. Customers don't ask questions. They see a middle-aged guy with grease under his nails, a face etched by whatever life has thrown at him, and that's enough. I do my job, get paid, buy food, pay rent, and once in a while, I send a text to my daughter. We chat briefly. She tells me about her day, I tell her about mine. We pretend it's all normal. One Friday, I closed up early, locked the garage, climbed the stairs to my little room. Same routine. I twisted open a bottle of whiskey, sat on the edge of the cot, and let my mind wander. I pictured the old house, the living room, the hallway, the bedroom door cracked open. Sometimes I still hear the echoes of that laughter from her throat, that rasping sound. I remember how I grabbed a chair, watched them, said nothing, let them finish. That image is frozen in my head. It's like it happened yesterday. I've tried to see other women, maybe once or twice. But I can't. I can't open up, can't shake the feeling that it'll all crumble again. So I stick to myself. People say life's too short to live this way, but they haven't walked in my shoes. They don't know how it feels to discover that everything you built was a lie. Some nights, I sit outside on the metal steps that lead up to my room. There's a narrow view of the road, a few passing cars. Occasionally, a kid rides by on a bike, or I see a family in a minivan. It stings to watch them, to see a dad and his children in the rear seats, heading to who knows where. I wonder if he has secrets too, or if his kids will someday do a DNA test and unravel him. Probably not. Not everyone's life is a soap opera. Maybe that's just mine. My daughter calls every now and then. We don't talk about the big stuff. We talk about her job, her day, the new coffee shop she found. But there's an unspoken weight in our voices. A sense that we both know how fragile this bond is now. She tries to be cheerful. She used to have this bright, carefree tone when she was younger. But now there's caution, like she's stepping on glass. I can't blame her. I'm the one who walked out. Sometimes I think about writing down my story, as if that would help me make sense of it. But then I laugh at the idea. Who'd want to read this misery? And besides, I'm no writer. I'm just a mechanic who got cheated on, lied to, and blindsided by fatherhood that wasn't real. That's not a story. That's just a cautionary tale. A few weeks ago, my daughter texted me a photo of herself wearing a graduation cap. She finished her degree. She looked proud, but I could also see something missing in her smile. Maybe it was me. Maybe it was the knowledge of who her real father might be. She's never told me if she searched for him. I never asked. Part of me doesn't want to know. Another part of me wants to punch his face in for leaving her, or for being oblivious, whatever his story is. But none of that changes the fact that she's grown now. She's not a little girl anymore. She's making her way in the world. Without me, mostly. Every so often, I wonder if I made a mistake, if I should have stayed to be her dad no matter what the biology said. But how do you stay with a woman who's betrayed you like that? And how do you look at your child the same way when you realize she's been used as a lie? I did my best, but my best wasn't good enough. Or maybe I just didn't have it in me to forgive. People talk about forgiveness like it's a holy virtue. But sometimes, the wound is too deep. Sometimes, you can't just patch it up and move on. I'm not proud of it, but that's the truth. My daughter's kept the door open though. She calls, visits now and then, asks how I'm doing. She doesn't push, doesn't demand. And I'm grateful for that. We talk about safe topics, her career plans, new restaurants, the weather. We avoid the gaping hole in our relationship. But at least we talk. That's more than I do with her mother, who's basically a ghost to me. Last I heard, the woman I was married to moved a few states away, or so the rumor goes. She might have found someone else, or maybe she's alone. I really don't care. I used to dream about confronting her, telling her how she ruined my life. But now I just feel indifference. Hate takes energy, and I've run out. Some folks might say I should find a way to move on, start dating, get a place with more space, maybe buy a little house. But it doesn't feel right. I don't want to build anything new. This tiny room above the shop is enough for me. The guys at work have gotten used to my quiet ways. They respect that I do my job and don't pry into their personal business. In return, they leave mine alone. On my days off, I grab a bottle, or I drive out to a lake about 30 miles away, sit on the shore, watch the water. Sometimes I'll fish. Sometimes I'll just stare at the waves. It's peaceful. And in that peace I remember the chaos of what happened, and I realize how tired I am. Tired of fighting, tired of feeling. So I just breathe. I know I'm not the only man who's been cheated on. Not the only one who's discovered a child he raised wasn't his. But it feels lonely anyway. It's not a club you want to join. And people don't talk about it in polite conversation. So you carry it like a private scar. A couple of days ago, my daughter called again. She asked if I could come see her new apartment. She wanted me to help fix a leaky faucet. I hesitated at first, but then I said yes. Maybe it was time to do something that felt like a normal fatherly act. I haven't gone yet, but I will. I might fix the faucet, maybe take her out for lunch, try to laugh about something trivial. We'll see how it goes. I won't lie, I'm still broken. But I also know she's the closest thing I have to redemption. Not that biology means nothing, but love can still mean something, even if it was built on a lie. She might not carry my genes, but she carries the memories of the time I was there for her, the nights I read her stories, the days I taught her to throw a softball. Maybe that counts for something. So this is my life. I'm not waiting for a miracle. I don't expect a neat, happy ending. I see other guys my age with second marriages, stepkids, grandkids, a retirement plan. That's not for me. I'm just a man who had his reality torn away, who ran from the wreckage, and who still picks up the phone when his daughter calls. Maybe that's the only thread keeping me from drifting off completely. If that's what I have, I'll take it. And that's where I'll leave it. No moral, no grand lesson. Just the truth as I lived it. I won't say I regret everything, but I do regret some of the cruelty, the box I sent, the silence I forced on my daughter. But regrets don't change the past. They just remind you that you're human. And maybe that's enough for now. I'm not a hero or a victim, just a guy who found out the hard way how fragile life can be. The final act was mine. I tore down the stage, burned the props, left the spotlight. Now all that's left is a quiet seat in the back of the theater, where I can watch the rest of the world carry on without me. And that's all right. I don't need an encore.